Welcome to the DPN car collection for another new video. Actually, it's kind of a carry-on, or I suppose a part two, but we're doing it as a separate video. And if you've come across the video before this, it'll be us refurbishing the calipers, and as you can see, the calipers are already removed. So if you want to see us removing the wheel and the calipers, then refer back to that video. But I thought we'd start a new video here and have them as two separate ones, as I say, almost like a part one and part two, but as separate videos. What we've noticed is the CV boot, once we've got all this clear, is not in very good condition. Hopefully you can see that this seam is almost breaking up and starting to leak oil out, and it's also split here behind the I think in this case the plastic tyre that's holding it on. But what we've also been aware of in recent time is a clicking coming from the CV joint. So rather than just replacing the boot, we're going to actually replace the CV joint on both sides, and actually they're not too expensive. So we decided, rather than replacing the boots at this stage, because we knew about that clicking, the boots obviously need changing, we'll do the CV joints on both sides. So hopefully this video you can follow us through the stage of removing the old CV joints and putting two new ones on both sides. What I'll try and do, like I've done with the brake, is probably just follow this side, but we'll be doing both sides. So as we're starting at this stage on this job, the first thing to do is to remove the disc, and on this disc it's actually two Phillips screws that hold it. We've got it lined up so it's one top and one bottom there. And that's the disc away, and what we'll do is probably repaint that when we're painting the other brake components, which of course are going to be in that other video, so it lines up as the two jobs but on separate videos. Right, so what we're next going to do then is remove the hub nut, and that's got that little bit of metal that you stake in, and we've just got to reverse that so that you can then undo the hub nut, which is what we're doing at the moment. Right, so we're now going to undo the hub nut. It will be tight. As you can see, we've got like a lever bar or a small crowbar to lock the wheel, so you can get the hub nut undone. So as this one's particularly tight, we've just changed sockets to one that's gripping it a little bit better, and we'll give it another go. Right, so what we're going to do is put the hub nut just back on again on the first few threads or so, just so those threads are protected. Because what we're going to do is just knock it with a copper hammer, and that hopefully helps to loosen the CV joint.
The hub.
Right, and that has now loosened the CV joint from the hub. As you see, we banged it and then it started to steadily go in, which lets us know it's now loosened. Right, so as you see, that initially didn't want to go in, but then did, and the reason we did it at that stage is because once you've got more stripped down, you then wouldn't be able to achieve that, so we just thought that was worth showing. So the next thing we're going to be doing is removing the bottom ball joint, and hopefully you can see that if I come down there, and that's got a split pin in. So the first thing we've got to do is remove that split pin, which is what we're doing. If it's been there a long time and it's rusty, it's not always going to be so easy to get out. Right, so we're now undoing that bottom nut. Now the split pin was so rusty it just would not come out, so the only choice we've got is to undo it. Because it's rusty, it will probably snap off, and then we can just knock the last little bit out. So all we've got to do now is knock what's left of the split pin out of that little hole there. And if I bring you up to the top, you'll just be able to see that ABS sensor there. We'll have to remove that as well, and that's what I was mentioning when we were doing the brake video. Right, so now we're going to undo the track rod end. Right, so now we're going to remove the top joint up there. Again, it's a split pin, so we think lightly it's not going to come out very easily, so we have to do the same as what we did on the bottom joint, is undo it and then remove it. So just panning back, we've done the bottom joint down there, then the track rod end, and now we're doing the top joint up there, getting that undone and loosened. Right, so to get all these other bits off so they're not damaged when you remove it, you've got the wire to the ABS sensor. We've just unclipped that from its mountings. We've got the brake pipe, which is bolted there with two key little bolts, and then of course on top of this ABS sensor you've got two little Phillips screws on top of that, which I think is a job for you to see. We'll be removing them as well. Right, so we can't quite get to ABS sensor, so we're going to do that in a minute. So what we're going to do now is snap the ball joint on the track rod end, and we use that particular tool to do it, as we find that works the best for us. There are other different ways of doing it, but that one seems to work the best for us, and is the most easiest normally to use and get the job done efficiently without doing too much damage. And that's it snapped and removed. So now I'm going to do the same with the bottom joint using that same tool. It's a case of just hammering that in and then tightening it like you see on the track rod end. So now the bottom joint's out, it's just the top joint to do. So now we've got the track rod end joint out and bottom joint out, we're just doing the top joint. And as you see, it's come away, and that's now going to let us remove that whole part. Right, so now we've removed the suspension arm, you can see we can now get into this ABS sensor a little easier, and we think it's not actually these two screws here, but this little star screw there, and that'll get that out the way, and we can then hook that up the way out there. But while we're here, you can see the rust there and the rust in there, and that's why it had stuck in, and we had to knock this piece through by putting the bolt on to protect it. So we thought we'd show you that, because you can see why it was so stiff. You've got that rust there that's held in, and that's what will normally happen. So that's why it's worth just banging it through before you get the rest out, because if you hadn't done it at that stage and had got all these top and bottom ball joints off, it'd be more or less impossible to then do without kind of reassembling it. Yeah, so I thought I'd just add, thinking about that and from experience we've had before, not exactly in this situation, but if that did get stuck in and you were trying to remove it once you'd undone those ball joints, what can happen is as you pull this piece off, it will try and pull this with it, and that goes right down into the gearbox, and there's not actually a lot stopping that coming out. So what will happen is it will come out, and you'll lose all the oil out your gearbox, which is why we're sort of careful and make sure that that doesn't get stuck. As you can see, we've got a tray there just in case that does happen, because when we want to remove the CV joint, that's another time where that can happen. That's where it's happened with us. When you're removing it, it comes out the gearbox end, so we've got that tray there ready just in case. Right, so that is the ABS sensor removed. We've just hooked that up the way. And as you can see now, we can remove this completely away. Now, it is possible some people would have left it hanging at the top ball joint and just pushed it out the way to do this job. But we want to remove it. One is so we can take the shield off and paint it, and the chance are the bolts holding that on will be seized. But also we like to clean this up and completely paint it as well, and as you can see by removing that, it gives you lots of space to do this job. Right, so we've now got the other side to the same stage, and we were talking about removing this CV joint by cutting this boot off and removing it where it joins there. But as I said earlier, what can happen is, and what is likely, is that as you're trying to remove it, because it can come out of the gearbox end so easily it does, and you get oil everywhere, well, what we've decided to do is have a bowl there and actually remove it like that. That will let any of the gearbox oil out. Because we don't know the age of it, and we've actually got some gearbox oil, so we might as well let that drain out and put new oil in. And also it's going to be easier then to separate the CV joint off of the rest of the drive shaft on the bench. We can put the rubber boots back on the bench and get the clips right and generally clean everything up. So we've decided that's going to be the easiest way to do it. That way we get new gearbox oil as well. So what we're going to do first of all is undo the plug on the gearbox, which if I bring you round here, and you'll see there's one of those like little hexagon drives in the plug on the gearbox. We're going to undo that so that there's air into the top of the gearbox so that the oil should drain out quicker, and it'll also stop any sort of vacuum almost locking that in as well. So that's what we're going to do next. So what we've done, we've just put a jug under there in the bowl, because although this is the filling plug, it is possible that some oil could run out. It's not going to in this case, but that's just to be safe rather than sorry. There are actually a couple of gearboxes that were used on these 45s. Some take almost the same as engine oil, and others take the traditional gearbox oil. We think this is the one that takes the traditional gearbox oil going by the manual, but of course we'll soon know, because when it runs out, proper gearbox oil or normal gearbox oil has a distinctive smell, so that would definitely confirm it for you anyway. Although we're not going to be separating them till we got on the bench, what we're still going to do is still remove this boot, because if you do have to go backwards through this hole, it'll be a lot easier to come out, and it just gives us a little bit more access and room. This boot was actually held on with plastic ties, which sometimes they are, or they can have that sort of traditional metal clip on them. But often when they fail, people do put plastic ties on, and even we've done that to hold the boots on. That's what someone's done with this drive shaft boot. And as you can see, although not quite as bad as the other side, it's still beginning to go, and they're certainly not looking very good. Yes, you can really see how this one started to fail here and there, and that's the boot off.
Yeah, pretty well perished.
So we're now going to remove the drive shaft, as we said, from the gearbox. Sometimes they come out very easily, almost fall out when you don't expect it to, and other times it can be quite stiff. And as you can see, we've got like a little tyre lever or lever behind there, and we'll gently leave it. Obviously you've got to be careful you don't damage anything, but that's what we're doing. Hopefully it will just pop out, and then the gearbox oil will run out into our tray, all going well. And as you can see, that just sort of popped out, a little bit stiff, but not a real problem trying to get that one out. And you can see the gearbox oil's just starting to dribble out. Right, so now we've got it out, we'll just pull it through there like that. Right, so now the drive shaft is out, you can see the oil steadily draining out, and hopefully in there you can just about see the splines in there. Now if you remember that, as we come out to the drive shaft, you can then see the splines on the end, and they go into there, and that's what gives you the drive. And if you can see this little piece of ringed metal in this slot, that when you go through those splines, that drops off over the edge of them almost and opens out, and that's what holds this in. And when we were tapping and levering it out, we were trying to almost close that back in to go back through the splines and out. Hope that makes sense. We might be able to show you a bit better when we're down doing that end on the bench. I just thought we'd try and explain what we were trying to do by levering and tapping it to get it out. Right, so now that oil is finished draining out, we just put a little bit of tissue in there just to stop any dirt getting in there. And actually, not a lot of oil has come out, so we think that the oil may have been a bit on the low side, so it's a good thing we're doing this. Now, as we said before, as far as we understand, there's mainly two gearboxes that go in these 45s. As I said, one takes more or less an engine oil and the other one takes the gearbox oil. And we said, you know, if it takes the gearbox oil, you'll smell it. Well, actually, this oil coming out doesn't have that gearbox oil smell. It more or less, as far as we tell, smells like engine oil. So we think that actually this is one of the gearboxes that takes the engine oil in it. And the other thing is, there doesn't really appear to be an obvious drain plug, only a fill plug, which would line up with it being one of the gearboxes that take the engine oil. Obviously we'll do a little bit more checks, but it looks like that's the case with this. What we're going to do now is go and do exactly what we've done here on the other side and remove the other drive shaft. Right, so we're now on the other side. Although, as I said, you know, we won't show both sides because they're very similar. I just thought I'd show that's where the drive shaft comes out on the other side. It's actually, I suppose, above the exhaust there, and this is the longer drive shaft. You've got the much longer drive shaft this side coming all the way out. So although we've shown you in detail on the other side, I just thought I'd show you that just you can see where it is and how that's the longer drive shaft on the driver's side of the car, and we've been mainly showing you the passenger side in detail. So just laid out on the workshop floor, I thought I'd just show you what we've taken off so far on this job. Of course, you've got the two suspension arms and the wheel bearings, and of course the two drive shafts that we've just taken out. And there you can really see how one is a lot longer than the other one, and the longer one has this kind of almost anti-vibration rubber block on it. Of course, we've got the brake disc there that we took off as well, and there with the brake stuff, and they're going to be done with the other job we are videoing on the brakes. But yeah, I just thought this stage would give you just a little look at some of the stuff laid out on the workshop floor before we start doing any of the work. And while we're here, as always, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to look through the other videos we're doing, and of course we've got our Twitter and Instagram pages, and links to that on our home YouTube page as well. Oh, so I just thought I'd update you on this from when we were looking at this last night, although for you it's a lot quicker. We were talking about the drain plug on this gearbox possibly not having one. You may have seen that bottom bolt, and of course we'd seen that as well. We were worried it was the detents ball for the gear changes. What we've done with a bit more research is found that actually it was that is the case, but it also is the drain plug as well. So if I bring this up, and you can just see the little ball in the end, but it's also got your seal there, so it's almost a two-part thing. It's the drain plug and it's got that detent ball in it as well. And if I come back up, and hopefully if I get the lighting right, you can see almost like little teeth in there, and that's what the ball springs in now. But if we just move the gear lever a little bit inside, hopefully you'll see it moving. Yeah, you can see that moving there. So I just thought I'd show you that, as that's what we've sort of been sorting out. And what that's done, if I come down here, that's let us drain the rest of the gearbox all out, which we really did want out, so as a complete change, because actually it's looking pretty dirty. I mean, they even suggest in the manual that it's a lifetime oil and you only top it up with engine oil, but when the cars get to this age it really does need changing. So that's the good thing, we've got all that oil out now, it's all drained out, we can change it and then we'll put that back. But it's certainly worth being aware of, and that's why we were initially reluctant to undo it or consider that as a drain plug, because that's what we thought it was. And as you can see there, it's just underneath the fill plug. We come in from the front of the car to the gearbox. We've now got that drain plug tightened back in, so that's now done up, and we've got the fill plug just in but loose, ready for when we come to refill the gearbox. One of the other things we had noticed was that on this sort of end plate to the gearbox there's been a leak here, so what we're going to do is remove that. If I bring the camera right round, that lets you just see the end plate in full there. We're going to remove that, clean up the surface, and then we'll put it back. We think that actually it's possibly not a gasket. Yeah, we think it's probably an instant gasket, but we'll have to see till we get it off. But that's going to be the next job, is to get that off. We'll clean that up, probably paint it as well, and reseal that back, because we don't want to put that new oil in and find that continues to leak. Right, so while we've got the suspension legs off, of course with the bearing in, we're going to clean them up, paint them up, almost a minor refurbishment, just so they look tidier when they go back. And one of the things that you'll probably find if you were doing this more or less on any car that has these shields, they often get in quite a state and get very sort of rusty. You can see that one, so they're worth certainly taking off and cleaning up and painting. The only problem with these shields is, and we don't really know why they did it, it goes all the way round, so technically the only way of getting this sort of brake shield or guard off would be to take the bearing out, which we don't want to do. And I think it's a sort of a known thing. What you do is cut this bit that runs along the back out, and if I show you on the other shield we've done that, so it can literally then just be slotted back in and put back on when we finish cleaning it up and painting it. And then once we've got that off, what we're going to do is be wire brushing these suspension legs. And if I come across over here to the bench, we've got this one in the bench, and we're just wire brushing that off so we can repaint it. Right, so while we're preparing this second suspension arm for cleaning, I just thought I'd cover how on the other one, which we didn't show, what we've also going to do is remove the ABS sensor, which you can see there. We're just putting the ratchet on, and also you'll see just there's that little bracket that holds the brake pipe to the suspension arm. We're going to remove both of those just so that we can definitely paint it or clean it up and put them back. And what you can see there we're doing is just tapping it into the top there, because where they're slightly rusty, if you don't get it right in, it'll just chew the end up, and they are quite tight. So that's what we do. As you can see, they're quite tight, but once you've got it going, then it will start moving. We just thought we'd cover that as well, because that's one of the things that's very easy to do, is to chew those ends up. Right, so as part of the cleaning up, of course, we're also going to clean up the drive shafts. And before we clean them up, what we want to do is remove the old CV joint there, which we've bought new ones ready to replace them. But first of all, we've got to get that one off and then clean all this up and paint it. We've put the hub nut on the end, so the end thread doesn't get damaged, and it's a very similar spring clip to what we showed you before. And if you're lucky, it comes off as easy as that, and it doesn't always come off like that. We did have one time ago that we had real problems, but that's an example of it coming off. And you should now be able to see that clip exactly like the clip that was on that other end that we showed you that went into the gearbox. Right, so while you're here, I thought I'd show you the other CV joint coming off, and the boot at the other end. We have got new boots for that, so we'll be replacing that as well. Again, what we're going to do is put the hub nut on, so if it falls off, that the thread shouldn't get damaged. And we've got like a little bit of padding down there, so hopefully it lines up and falls onto that anyway. And it may look slightly brutal, but if you get it right, it actually comes off a lot easier than some other ways you can do it. And again, straight off. And I just wanted to say also, you can see the ABS ring is on that, and what it might be worth doing when you're ordering the new one, if you change it, is to make sure it does come with that ABS ring. Now, the people we ordered it from, it looks like they always send it out with the ABS ring, whether you need it or not, but that is worth checking as well if you're going to order a new one of those CV joints. Right, so that's them both off, and there is that shorter drive shaft with the CV joint removed next to it. We think if you do need to replace the joint the other end there with the boot still on, it's not very easy to get off, and it's possible you probably need to change the whole drive shaft, so it's certainly worth being aware of that. What we're going to do now is remove that rubber boot on that side, then we'll be cleaning them up. Right, so as well as cleaning up the bits of suspension we've removed, what we want to do is clean up this a little bit as well, although it's not too bad and been painted in recent times. We think it's worth doing. Before that, you may remember there was that split pin that broke off. Of course, one was right up there. We're just going to drill them out before we clean them. So we got those split pins drilled out, or what was left of them, and now what we're going to do is just wire brush over these bits of the suspension like we're doing with the other bits, or going to do with the other bits, and then paint it up so it's all nice and tidy. So now we're just going to paint this up, and you see we've done quite a bit already, just so that it's nice and tidy and will match up with all the other bits that we paint when we put it all back on. Right, so as I said at that last stage, the next stage will be to clean this up, which is what we've done. We give that a wire brush ready for painting. And with this rubber boot, it's got those metal clips on. We've removed them, and actually, interesting enough, this one is almost been put on, as you can see there, just in, and you more or less have to snap it apart to get it off. It's not one of those sort of ratchet types or tie types. So the next stage is to pull the rubber boot back and then remove this bit off. Sometimes it's easy, other times it's quite difficult. With this one, it's more or less, we could even fill it before we even started. It's going to come off easy, which it has. Well, this sort of thing, it is luck. Sometimes they're just very difficult to get off. But as we said before, this bit is on there. You can't get that off. So if there's any problems with this bit, it is more or less a drive shaft change. But in our case, that's fine. So all we will do is clean it up, get all that old oil off, and repack it with the grease, and then put the boot back on. Right, so we're just going to cut the boot off because we're putting new ones on, but at this stage really it'd be silly not to, because it's such a difficult job to put a new boot on. Well, you've got it at this stage, they're not expensive, so it's worth doing. And this one is showing signs of wear, although it isn't really bad. Right, so we've wiped all the excess sort of grease, almost turned to like a liquidy oil off, and all we're doing now is just washing the rest off with a bit of thinners. That way all the dirt comes out and doesn't contaminate any sort of cleaning fluid. It's just stuff we can get rid of. So we're going to continue doing that, and then it will all be ready for painting, and we'll do the same with the other drive shaft as well. And I might show you a few little bits of the stages of that as well. Right, so that's the inboard end all nice and clean, and I just thought I'd show you this. They are actually roller bearings or needle roller bearings. You can just about see them there, and now we've got it all cleaned up. You can actually, there is a circlip there, so it is possible you can get this off, but we reckon it'd still be very difficult to get that off. And also, we've certainly never seen this end for sale, so I think it's probably still like you'd still have to get the whole drive shaft if you did need. So as we didn't show you on the other drive shaft, I just thought I'd show you how we're cleaning off what's left of the paint and getting some of that rust back. We're using an air sander sort of grinders. We found that's the best way to do it, and this is one with like a sandpaper sheet on it, quite an abrasive one, and that seems to do it the best and easiest and quickest. Right, so as you can see there, that one just breaks apart, and it's the same as the other one, like little teeth that pushes together. And actually, we've never seen that design before, so we wonder whether either it was done in its very early life by a main dealer, or these are possibly the original rubber boots on the inbound drive. But yeah, we've certainly never seen that type. Normally it is the type you crimp and clamp, or even sort of an adjustable clip, or sometimes even a tie is used. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see those still in use. I thought I'd show that coming off this time, and although we've shown most of what happens on the other drive shaft, I'll show you a few little bits, especially the bit where we cut the rubber and remove this off of those little sort of ball bearings that are there. Oh, and that one has come off as easy as the other one, which is good. Again, the grease really messy, so we'll clean all of that out. Actually, it's slightly more thicker, the grease, than in the other one, so that was very runny in that last one. But yeah, we'll clean all that off, and like before then, and all be ready for us to start the reassembling. So we're now cleaning the suspension arms. We're using the air sort of sander grinder. We've got a nice rough sanding disc on it. We've covered up all the bits where any sort of dust or grit can get in. We'll clean that up. We might even sandblast them, but if it comes up okay with wire brushing and the sanding disc, we'll leave it at that. So what we're doing now is just giving it a little wire brushing. Now we've sanded off all the sort of real in-depth rust that was on there. Right, so now we've got all the drive shafts clean, as you've been seeing. We're now going to paint those. We're painting those first because there are bits, rubber sort of seals go over, so we decided to paint these first. So it's just a case of painting both the drive shafts, and also we've got the legs down there to paint as well. Right, so we're now just painting the suspension legs. What we're doing on both the drive shafts and the suspension legs is using a black hammerite paint, because that can technically go on without an undercoat. It's also a rust protector, and can deal with any little bits of minor rust that's still there, even where we've wire brushed it and cleaned it up. And it's normally long lasting, we've found as well. So it's just a case of like before, just painting them all up. Right, so that's both the suspension legs now painted, and of course we've got the drive shafts painted there, so we can now leave them to dry, and then we'll start to refurbish those drive shafts. As you've been seeing, we've been cleaning up and painting the suspension parts and the drive shafts, and you know, one of the reasons we wanted to do this was to change the CV joints, and we've bought two new ones in the boxes. We've got these from J&R through eBay, and actually we got one drive shaft for one CV joint for one of our other 45s, and actually we were quite impressed because actually they seem quite cheap in comparison to the price you'd think you'd have to pay for one of these. So we were a little bit worried, but we got it, and actually it was a really nice joint, and it's now been on the car a good few years and there's been no problem. So when it come to changing the CV joints on this car, we were more than happy to buy these again, so that's what we've done. They're the two CV joints. You get one in each box, and also in the box they give you the rubber boot you need. You get the grease as well, so actually it's a nice little kit. And then you get a bag with the two metal rings that grip on your rubber boot, and also you get the hub nut, and hope you can see in the bag there the little clip as well. So yeah, they're quite a nice little kit, and what we are going to do is obviously get them fitted onto the drive shafts. But what we are going to do, we're actually going to paint this surface with the little teeth in, which is for the ABS sensor, and the bit around it, because we find that always seems to go rusty, and actually the ABS sort of geared rings for the sensing weren't in very good condition on our CV joints either, which we found you can actually get these rings as a replacement on their own, but we just made sure there was new ones on these new CV joints, so we're going to paint them so that they shouldn't be a problem. As far as we know, it doesn't affect the sensing. We've painted them before on other cars and it hasn't, so it shouldn't be a problem on these as well. So that's at the stage where we're opening them up and sorting them out, giving them that little bit of paint. So I just thought I'd show you them as they come out the box in that little kit that we bought. Right, so we've got them out the bags now, and as you can see, what we've done is just masked up round here, ready to paint this area. And I just thought I'd have the old CV joints so you can see just how sort of rusty the little cogs have gone for the ABS sensor and all round that area, and it won't be long before this lovely shiny metal ends up as rusty and corroded as that. So that's why we're going to paint it so that doesn't happen. We've degreased them with a little bit of brake and clutch cleaner, and then we're painting. We've taped them up so that seal's protected. And what we are glad about is that the seal does come with these new ones, so we haven't even got to transfer that over either. Right, so we're now painting all the bits we need to, as I spoke about last night. We're using a heat resistant engine red paint. We always tend to get ours from Halfords, because although we've bought different heat paints from elsewhere and even online, we can't seem to get that red that the red Halfords paint uses, so we seem to always come back to that. This is just the first coat, always looks a little bit smear, and then we normally do at least another one, possibly even a third coat. But putting that rust killer on first, which is what we did to get rid of any rust that was left after the sandblast and wire brushing, has certainly helped with the paint adhering on the first coat. Right, so we're now all ready to put the drive shafts back together. We're going to be putting the shorter one of the two back together first of all. And we've got everything laid out. I just thought I'd show you that. The first thing we're going to do is put back the inner drive joint that's there, and we removed that one because it came off, and sometimes they don't, because we wanted to paint it and clean it all out and re-grease it properly. So as you've seen earlier, we've got that all painted. What we've done is bought a universal boot kit for the inner drive joint, and if I bring you down here, that's the one we bought. And lucky enough, actually, wasn't fully planned, it's the same make as the company we've bought the CV joint from, which is quite nice. So all the stuff we're using has ended up coming from the one company, all online through eBay, so that's worked out quite nicely. As I say, it's a universal boot kit we bought for the inner one. The kit come with the boot, you've got 2 packets of grease, which is really nice. You think one is probably so you've got some grease if you're using the cone, but obviously we've took it all to bits, so you won't need to use one of those cones that, if you've seen them, they scratch the boot to get it over everything if you're not fully stripping it down. The kit also comes with the bands that hold the boot on as well, which is quite nice. But what we realised when we took this to bits, hopefully you can see this in a drive joint has like little dips in it, and there's 3 of them. So once the boot goes on, if I show you, the boot's completely round, so there would actually have technically been a little gap down the side when we were doing it. So what we did is did a little bit of research and even looked on some of these sites that were selling these boot kits, and it seems to be one of the things people are doing is they cut the bottom part off of the original boot, and as you can see on this, there's those 3 little dips in there. You put that on and then put this over the top, so those little gaps are sealed. So that's what we're going to be trying to do with that. So if you see us doing that, that's why we're doing that. And then over here we've got the new CV joint that again we've painted, and as I said earlier, that's so this bit doesn't go rusty too quick and just looks a bit nicer. And in with the kit we got with the CV joint in came the right boot, so it is actually a pre-made one rather than a universal one. It is actually the right size as far as we can tell, which is quite nice. And you might have seen I was talking about that cone to scratch the boots on. We've got one of those cones there. You can do it that way. We find it very, very difficult, although sometimes when you see it online or people do it, they seem to imply it's easy. We don't think it's that easy unless we do it wrong. It is quite a struggle, but it does work. So if you can take it to bits like we're doing, it at least a lot easier, but that isn't always the case. I just thought I'd show you that. So yeah, we've got all the stuff together, and we're going to put together the shorter drive shaft of the 2. If I pan out there, you can see it's the shorter one of the 2 first of all. Right, so we've got the inner drive joint on the vise, or in the vise. We've got some rubber sort of bits in the claws so that we don't do any damage, and we've left that bit of masking tape on. And you can see now that what's left of that other boot fits on and hopefully covers up or seals these little dips here, which if we'd have just put the universal boot on its own, they would have technically been left open. Now, not every time it will be like this if you've got a 45, because they use different gearboxes on the 45s through the years, and this, as far as you know, is the only gearbox on all of our 45s that's like this, and we think it is the Ford gearbox on ours. One we've looked, and it seems like Ford cars often have these little dips in their inner drive joint around about that sort of time. And also there's actually a Ford logo on the gearbox, but the manuals don't seem to really always distinguish what gearbox is likely to be in your car, so it is a case of finding out when you're doing it. And as I say, when we've done the research, we found this is one way of getting round it, other than buying a proper boot that actually fits it, which it appears when you look online, nothing is recommended for the 45s. And if you look for the Fords, there appears to be boots that look like this. One thing is we don't know if they definitely fit, and secondly is they're quite expensive. And as I say, in our research, it seems to be this is a thing even for the Ford ones they recommend doing to seal up these little nodules or cups within the inner drive joint. What we've also done is slid the universal boot on. It's quite a big boot, and what you do once you've started to fit it, you see how much you need, and there's actually lines here where you can cut it to make it shorter if you need to. It's normally too long. So the next bit we've got to do is pack some of the grease all round that comes with the kit. Right, so we're just putting a little bit of that grease in there, and what we'll also be doing then is putting a little bit round this as well, and then just before we put it on, we'll put just a little bit more. And you don't need lots and lots, but you need enough for it to work and do its job, basically. Normally the packets will give you more than enough, and as I said, with this kit we got 2, so there's far more than enough. Right, so as you can see, we've put all the grease round the end of the drive shaft and into the inner joint there. It's one of those things, it is really your sort of judgment how much you put on. We've more or less judged it. It's really kind of used a whole packet. We certainly wouldn't want to use more than a whole packet in there. Now all we've got to do is just slide it back in. And yeah, it should slide just in like that, and then it'll be a case of us then getting the boot slid down and picking the right size, and what's just left there in that packet we're going to put in. Right, so we're just sliding the boot down, and as you can probably see, it's miles too big, which is what we expected. And then once we've got it right, we'll then cut off the access that's there, so it will then look like a boot that's been designed to fit it. And normally they work quite well. As I said, we've used these universal boots on our other 45s, and they appear to last as long as any other boot would. Right, so we've now got the boot onto a place we're happy with, and what we've done is pulled it down so that when we come to cut it, we'll be cutting it about there, and that is all the access, and it's sitting nicely into the groove that sits into this shaft there, and we've made sure that it can pull up and down. And there's plenty of flexibility in that rubber, so it will move up and down. But what we'll do, we're going to put the metal bands on top and bottom before we do any cutting. Just be sure it's definitely right, and then we will cut that access away. Right, so we've got the clips positioned. I'll sort of show you roughly how these clips work. As you can see, there's lots of little holes in it, and then on the bit that's coming round, you'll see 3 little hooks, and they're like a one-way hook, so once they hook in, they can't be pulled back. So what you try and do is get this as tight as possible on there and get those hooks in and let it slip back in. And then the way you get it really tight is you have a little tool or a pair of pliers that pinches this together, that really brings it in tight. We've got the actual tool for doing that, and that basically comes onto those there, and you crimp it tight, and that's how it gets tight. And you do that top and bottom. So what we're going to do now is just get them positioned so they are ready to crimp with the tool. Right, so we've got the clip now in its, what I'd call its loose position, ready to now use the tool to squeeze it and fully tighten it up. And hopefully, if it goes well, it works. It is a bit of a difficult thing to sometimes do this, but once they're on, they do seem to stay on and work well. Right, so hopefully you can see there, we've now crimped what was that big lug much tighter, and these almost one-way hooks now cannot come out, and it's all on and nice and actually done like sometimes they're done from the factory. So if you can use these, it is a nice way of doing it. All we've got to do now is do the same with the top one. Right, so we've got both of the bands on, and they're looking nice and gripping nice. And then what we're doing now is, just as you can see, cutting the access off a bit at a time, and then turning the drive shaft round in the vise, and then cutting the next bit, and we'll go all round, and then that access will be completely removed off, and we're just giving it a little bit of support while we're doing it. Right, so that's the band now all cut around, and we can just then pull it away, and now hopefully it's fitting as a proper boot should do, and we're quite happy with all the bands that are on it as well. Just a little bit of cleaning the grease off, we've left that there so that end doesn't get damaged with the masking tape, and that is that boot all nice and on. Right, so we've now put the drive shaft back in the vise upright. Now all that bottom joint is in, and or inner joint. Now we're going to do the main drive shaft, which is the new part we've bought. What you need to remember to do with this first of all is to put the little teeny ring on first, and the boot, so that that's then all ready to go over when you put the drive shaft on. We've got the little teeny spring ring there, which is what actually grips it on, so that's all on. So all we've got to do is put the grease in like we did on the other end, and then we'll be ready to put it on. Right, so we've now got the boot on, and what we've done is put a little bit of grease on this boot so it slides over the pole. We've put some grease on here, and what you want to do is make sure that little circlip spring ring is completely central so it doesn't get forced when you're putting the drive shaft or the joint on, the drive shaft joint on. And as you can see, we're putting the oil into that, or the grease into this, and you can see the little balls and the movement in there. We've put all the grease in so they're all nice and covered before we put it on. Right, so we've got all the grease in that drive shaft joint, and as I said, we've got the grease there on the little gears, and also we've got the circlip spring clip nice and central in that groove, so that when it goes into here it sort of gets forced or shrunken in and then springs out on the other side. Right, so what we're also going to do is put the old hub nut on. With this kit you get a new hub nut, and normally you should always change the hub nut each time because you've got the little bit that you knock in. So we're going to use the old hub nut on there, because to get that spring washer to definitely go through and spring in, you normally have to give it a little tap with a copper hammer, but even so you still don't want to damage those threads, so we put that little hub nut on just to make sure that the threads don't get damaged. Right, so that's it in, and as you see it went on fairly straightforward. Once you've got it lined up, just a short sharp tap and it goes down and on. And what I was doing was just holding the drive shaft while we tapped it on. So now all we've got to do is put the boot on like we did before. So that is the drive shaft complete. We've got the inner there, and also the outer all done, and all ready to put back on the car. And really a very clever bit of technology, really allowing the car to completely steer, and this bit moving up and down as your suspension moves. Yeah, very, very clever. And I just want to give you one last little look inside the CV joint without the greasing, because I can't remember if we did have a little look, and you can see all of what's in there as well. So yeah, all it is now to do is the longer drive shaft of the two. I won't go into so much details, we've covered this in quite a bit of detail, but there's a few little bits we might show you that we will do slightly different because it is the longer drive shaft. Right, so now it's time to start the longer drive shaft of the two. As I said before, we're not going to go into so much detail with this, because really it's very similar to the other drive shaft, but one of the differences is that you may remember on the shorter one we was able to slide this boot on this way, because you can't slide it on from this direction because those rollers are in the way. But on the longer one you've got this rubber, what we think is sort of a dampener to stop vibration on the shaft, and almost like a sort of a balance weight as well. It's not very easy to get that off without really cutting it off, and then you'd never get it back on right. So you can't get it on from either end, and we don't really want to use one of those combs because, as we said before, they're quite difficult to use. So what we're planning to do is to remove these rollers off from this end, and hopefully, if the camera can focus, you'll see there's like a little circlip there. We're hoping we can remove that, slide these rollers off of the end of the drive shaft. That'll then allow us to put the boot slid on from that direction, put them back, and then the job will be the same. So we're trying to cover that part, and then it'll just be the same as the other one. Right, so as you can see, we've removed that little circlip there, and what we've done is tried removing it, and it looks pretty stuck on. So either we're unlucky and this one's stuck on, or it's been done where they freeze the metal, put it on, and when it warms up it then locks on. Either way, we don't want to damage it trying to pull it off, because then you've written off the drive shaft, because as far as we know you cannot just buy this section, and even if you could, we still don't really want to be buying that. You can't heat it up because it would do damage, so we are going to have to use the cone that I showed you earlier, which you didn't really want to do, to get the boot on. So that's the stage. But I thought I'd cover that in case it's an idea you'd thought. It looks like that's not removable even with that circlip out. The circlip must be a pure safety feature, unless of course that has seized on there, but we're certainly not going to risk removing it off, especially when we've got the cone and an alternative way to do it, even though it is slightly harder. Right, so what we're doing is getting some grease on the cone, as you can see, and also putting grease all inside the boot, or technically the outside the boot, but the boot has been turned inside out. Now actually there's plenty of instructions about doing this, because one, there are instructions on the cone, and also the boot, because it's a universal boot, comes with instructions on how to do this if you've got a cone. So there's certainly no problems if you're doing this about getting instructions, because your cone will have them on, and also it's likely the universal boot will have them on. The biggest problem is getting it to work as they suggest it does, because we find it is quite a struggle to get these boots on normally. But what we're doing is following the instructions that came with the boot, which suggests you using the grease. The cone says use a silicone spray. We've done that before, and it just doesn't seem slippery enough to get the boot on, so we're going to try the grease this time, and hopefully it'll work. All we've got to do is just take out the vise, put the boot on, and then hopefully it'll slide up and on. Right, so what we're doing now, as you can see, we've got the boot onto the cone, and we've twisted it around, moved it up and down to get the grease all round. Then, as you can see, it's wiped some of that grease off, so we'll put that on. It suggests, you know, to keep doing that really until you know the boot is definitely slipping by turning it and moving it up and down. There's plenty of grease there, so we'll do all that, and hopefully the boot will go on. And I think it'll probably take the two of us to do that.
It works.
Right, well actually that has worked a lot better using the grease. As you can see, it more or less took the grease off the cone. I held the drive shaft, I pulled it up and over, and that's it. All we've got to do now is turn it back the right way and clean all that grease off the outside of the boot. But at least this time it has worked. Right, so we're now more or less at a similar stage to where we were at the start of the other drive shaft. So as we've seen that, we're just going to get on with this one, and then both of them will be done. But yeah, hopefully us covering that bit about the longer drive shaft and the difficulty with the rubber boot has helped a little bit. Right, so that is both drive shafts done now, and are all ready to go back on the car. All we've got to do is remove that little bit of masking tape that we left on to protect some of those bits. But that's it. Yeah, we're very pleased. That's gone fairly well. A lot of work involved, but it's steadily flowed through and gone well. We'll next cover them going back on the car. Right, so we just thought we'd lay out all the bits that we've refurbished and painted. As you see, we've done now the drive shafts, and of course we've got the main suspension legs painted as well. And you know, we're then going to go on to refit the refurbished brakes in another video, but I thought in this video where we're doing the drive shafts completely sort of rebuilding them, I'll just show this shot of everything laid out and ready to go before we start fitting it. Right, so as you see, we've got all the bits ready to go back. Those suspension arms and, of course, the drive shafts, and also under the wheel arch, we've just done any little bits of paint that needs touching up, and we've also painted the rest of the suspension and subframe that needed doing as well. So everything's ready for those parts to go back now. Right, so we're going to put in the drive shaft in first. So we're just going to grease the seal, and you can see there where the drive shaft goes in to the gearbox. You can even see some of the gearbox in there, I think, just about on the camera. So what we're going to do is mainly show you from this side, which is the shorter drive shaft of the two, which is the passenger side of the car. A bit like we did showing you us mainly refurbishing the short one, and then we just did the longer one and showed any sort of bits of interest. We're going to do the same here, so just putting a little bit of grease on the end that's going on. Of course, we made sure that spring clip circlip is on there and not damaged as well. So the first thing you want to do is thread it through here, which is always a little bit tight. Once we've got it through there, then it'll be a case of putting it back into the gearbox. Right, so we're putting the drive shaft through now. It's always a little bit tight. We're going through front ways, as that bit that goes up against the gearbox, of course, is the smaller bit, and as you've seen, if you're lucky, it will go through fairly straightforwardly. Then all we've got to do is line it up and get it into the gearbox, which is just balancing there now while we sort ourselves out to do that. Right, so we think the teeth are in there now. It won't just gently push in, which sometimes it will. So we're just going to give it a little tap to get it to go in there, and that little spring clip circlip to go through and clip.
Make sure.
As you can see, I'll just try and get a little bit of a better angle for you. You can see that drive shaft is now in to the gearbox, and then if I pan out, you can see how it's coming through that part of the suspension and out there and ready. And what we did do was, again, just put the old hub nut on there to protect the thread when we were tapping it in. And then all we do then is remove that off, and then when it's time, we'll put the new one on. Right, so what we're doing now is like we did the other end, just greasing up the splines of the new CV joint, so there definitely won't be any grease on there, but even if we were using an older one, we'd have cleaned it off and re-greased it. This is a new one, so we're doing all that. And of course we're removing the masking tape off this seal. There's just a little bit more to remove off, and then we'll be ready then to put this part of the suspension and the wheel bearing back on. Right, so we've removed all the tape we had blocking up the middle splines there, and what we're now doing is just greasing on both sides. And again, we've checked that any of the paint we've done hadn't run behind that masking tape, and if it did, we've scraped any of that away. So that's now ready for the next stage of putting it back on. Right, so we're just sliding that on, as you can see, through the splines, so that the drive shaft is now through the wheel bearing, and then it's going to be a case of then connecting those top and bottom joints up there. Right, so we've just now got that bottom joint in. We put a little bit of copper slip on that castle nut just so it doesn't seize up too much in the future, and then it'll be a case of us lining up with the top joint once we've got that sorted out. Right, so what we're going to do with this top one is just pull that down and then put the nut on from the bottom, and that saves us jacking up from the bottom, which you can do if you're struggling to do it that way. We've managed to do it like that, and then it'll be a case of tightening those two up, and then it'll be a case of putting the split pin through on both of those where those castle nuts are. So we'll get that nut done up, and then it'll be a case of going back and tightening all three of those nuts up, and of course those top and bottom ones have got the split pin to go through them. Right, so what we're going to do now is get the other side to the same stage as this side, and as it is more or less the same, I'm not going to film that in great detail. So we're now on the driver's side, and as you can see, we're now at the same stage as the passenger side. It's all back together at that point. Now all we've got to do is to torque those same bolts up. Of course, that's the bottom joint, the top joint, and also the steering arm there. And hopefully, as you can see there, the drive shaft has gone into the gearbox nicely as well. And this is the, as I said, the longer drive shaft of the two sides, and it's gone fairly straightforward, and we do think sometimes that does make a big difference. Normally he's getting everything cleaned up and painted and ready to put back. Does make things a lot easier, and certainly a lot nicer and cleaner to do a job. And as always with the jobs we do, we're normally following the Haynes manual and the X-Part Rover discs. Normally with the discs we sort of refer to anything specialist or a bit more of a detailed look, and in general when we're out and about on the cars, we like a paper manual that we can quickly flick through and get most of the information and torque settings from. Right, so now we're going to torque those nuts up, and of course the top and bottom joint there that have got those castle nuts on, you'll then tighten it to the next split pin hole. So that's what we're going to do now. Right, so as you see there, we tightened it after the torque wrench clicked to the next hole, so that the split pin can go through the castle nut and make sure it can't undo. We're now going to get on and do the top one to the right torque setting and put that split pin through, and then the steering arm as well. So we're now going to tighten up and then torque up the hub nut. Right, so that's everything torqued up from the bottom joint there, and you can see the split pins in, also the top joint there with the split pin in, and the steering arm we've got torqued up, and then as you see we've just torqued up the hub nut. We're not going to stake the little stake in yet, because what we like to do is put the wheel back on and then check it one more time, then we stake it in, but we will do that. So I just thought I'd cover that as well, and I just thought I'd show you that where we did finally knock in the hub nut so that it's locked there. You can see the little punch mark where it goes into this little square hole nodule there. What we've got to do now is put back some of the wiring, and also of course that sensor for the ABS. We're just putting back those two red brackets that we painted that hold the lead, and then what we do, as I said, is then put back the ABS sensor. We're just putting back the little bracket that holds the ABS sensor on. That's got two little screw type bolts that hold that on, and then the actual ABS sensor is just held on with one of those little sort of torque bolt screws. Right, so that is those little finishing bits done, the ABS sensor and also those brackets holding the wiring. Right, so that's all those little finishing bits put back. We've got the ABS sensor back, and of course those brackets. All we've got to do is that on the other side. I'm not going to show that because it's the same as this side. And then of course we'll be moving on to getting the oil back in the gearbox. And also what we want to do before we put that all back in is, you can see that this end plate of the gearbox is sort of very rusty and messy, and I think we mentioned there's a slight leak from the seal or gasket that's behind it. it. So we're going to remove that, clean it up, get it painted, and put back a new seal gasket on there as well. So they're the next things we're going to do. So we're just steadily undoing the bolts on that end cover. It's just a series of bolts all the way around, and hopefully we'll be able to slide it down if there's enough room and it clears that metal. We're just going to have a tray there so that if there is any oil, which is likely, it'll go in the tray. And that is the end cover away, and you can see into the end of the gearbox. So what we do is clean that surface up, and also of course clean all that end cover up as well. So there's a little better look at the end casing of that gearbox. That's the side that you were seeing, and that's the inside. And it's quite interesting because you can see here where the seal has been sealing nicely, it's nice metal, and where it's begun to fail or possibly never put on fully properly, the weather's got in and rusted all this edge, which is probably why it was starting to leak. So we can now clean all that up, spray the outside, and put that back before we put the oil in the gearbox. Right, so we've now got this surface a little bit cleaner. We might do a little bit more cleaning, and we've wire brushed and sandblasted off the outer surface of it, and you can actually now, I think just about, if it focuses in, see it's marked up as Ford. So we know it definitely is one of the Ford gearboxes fitted to this one. What we are going to do, as well as using the sealant to seal this, we're also going to use a piece of gasket paper, which we've got here, and we're going to make up a gasket. So as well as the special sealant that you buy for sealing that sort of stuff, we're going to use a gasket as well and make that up. Right, so what we're doing now, before we mark out the shape, we're going to mark the holes. So we've marked the first hole and put a little bolt for it to hold it in position. And what we're doing to mark those holes, we've got a little ball bearing there, and we're lining up the hole, giving it a little tap like that, and when you pull it away, it's cut the hole out. So we have the series of holes, then it'll be a case of going round and marking the shape out. So we've got all the holes marked out now. We've drawn around the outside of this on there, you see, with a pencil line, and then what we did, we painted on some rust stuff, which we're going to need to put on that anyway, but what's still wet, laid the gasket over, and that's give us our rough inside line. All we've got to do is cut it out, and then we should have a gasket that has a fairly good fit. Right, so now all we're going to do is just steadily cut it out. The gasket paper came from a mixed set of gasket papers we bought online, and we picked this one because although it looks like paper, it almost feels quite rubbery. It's kind of soft, so we're hoping that'll be slightly more forgiving and long lasting with any luck. So all we've got to do now is just cut it out, and then it'll be ready. Right, so that's the gasket all ready. We're quite happy with that. All we've got to do now is paint the outside of it before we put it back, and is an oil resistant gasket as well, so we tried to get one that should work and last. Right, so we've put some rust killer on that cover, and while that's drying, what we're going to do now is just scrape off the rest of the sort of rusty debris and sealant that was originally used. All we've got to do is be careful we don't get it in any of the gearbox. If we do it steadily, we should be all right. So we're going to get on with that now and get all that surface clean, so it'll be ready when we come to put the cover back. Right, so now we are painting it. We've chosen to paint it blue, and it is an engine heat resistant paint as well, so we'll probably give that 2 coats, and then it will be ready to go on. Right, so we're now going to put on the instant gasket. I think a minute ago I said a silicone, but it is an instant gasket we've got, and it's one that mainly designed for engine sumps and ideal for heat, so hopefully this will be ideal for this. And as you see, we cut out our own little special heat and oil resistant gasket there as well, to really make sure we get a good seal, because we don't want it leaking again. And this is about the best you can do really, is have the instant gasket, which is all that was used originally, and our little paper gasket as well. And once that's on, what we're then going to do is then put another layer of that instant gasket over the paper gasket, and then we'll be able to put it back on the side of the gearbox. So now the gasket's on, we're just putting some more instant gasket on the top of that, and that will then seal with the side of the gearbox. Right, so now we've got a couple of bolts in to hold it, and then we'll just go round and put them all in, and then tighten it up. And if you are interested, this is the instant gasket we're using. It's just a case of looking up what's available and finding one that best suits what you need for the job, and that's what we did with this one. So once we've got all that back on, then it will be time to fill the gearbox with oil. Oh, so that's the cover all back fitted. What we're going to do is give it one final coat of paint now it's on there, and we left that off in case we marked it at all when putting it on. Then we put the final coat on where it's not going to get damaged, and it can sit there for a few days just drying before we then put the oil in. We've got the oil fill plug just there, so we'll be putting it in there. But as I say, we want that instant gasket to go off, and also the second coat of paint we're about to put on to dry as well. Right, so it's time to now put the oil in the gearbox. As we said before, this gearbox takes a standard almost engine oil, so that's the oil we're going to be using. But what we like to do, like when we service a car, is add in the heavy duty oil stabilizer or oil treatment from Lucas, and I think this gearbox works out we only need half of that, so that'll give us spare for another time. And what we're doing different this time is we're actually going to use an oil pump. Normally we fiddle about with a big tube at the top and a little cone and pour the oil down, which is fiddly. So this time we're going to be using this oil pump, which we see someone else using online from Sealy. So all we've got to do is get the oil into here, a mixture of this and this. When you add it in up to the level plug, and it starts to overflow, but hopefully we'll be able to show you that. Right, so because the oil stabiliser is quite thick, what we've done is put it in a little bowl of hot water, so it warms up and thins down just a little bit, so it's easier to pour. And what we've also done is marked where we want the oil stabiliser to come, and then we'll fill the rest up with oil, and that will let us mix it out of the car. And then if we need any more, we just put oil in to that pot and fill it up till the gearbox starts to overflow. And now all we're doing is pouring the oil into the container, so the stabiliser and the oil we're using will get mixed and go into the gearbox. And we think it is likely we'll use possibly another one of those, or certainly a good amount. Right, so as you can see there, you've got the bottom drain hole, and we've got our little pipe into the top filling plug, and we're just pumping the oil in. It's going to take quite a time to do, looking by the way it pumps, but we're hoping and think it is still easier than trying to fiddle about with a tube and holding it in, because that nice little metal hook goes up into the gearbox and is getting that oil into the gearbox. And we've got it all nicely mixed within that can as well. Right, so we're slowly going to continue pumping and getting that oil in, and once it's done we'll show you the next stage. Right, so we've kept pumping. As you can see now, it's dribbling out the top and down our tube, so that's full up. Now you may have to check it again after the car's run a little bit, but for now that is up to the top level. And actually, although it's a little bit of pumping, we think it is definitely worth having one of these pumps for putting in gearbox oil, because it certainly saved a lot of the mess of trying to find a pipe to fit in there, someone holding it underneath while I'm up on top with a cone into that pipe and trying to pour the oil down. This certainly makes it easier for that little bit of pumping. So yeah, that's that done. We'll put the level plug back in now. And that's the drain plug back in and nice and tight. So that is the drain plug back in and nice and tight, and that really is the end of this job. Of course, we started off by wanting to change the CV joints, and basically we put new CV joints on, refurbished all the drive shafts, we changed that end cover, and of course we've changed the gearbox oil and all the other little bits we did on that job. As always, hopefully it's been of use to you. They're not really how-tos, but they're just a chance for you to have a look at how we do it, and then if you're planning to do it, you can watch that video along with others, and of course look at the manuals as well. As always, we can't cover every little bit of the jobs. There's bound to be little bits we've left out, but hopefully we've covered enough. Don't forget to look at some of our other videos, and of course don't forget to look at the other video we've been doing alongside this one, which has been changing the calipers and refurbishing them, and all the brake work that will be available as well on the channel. But for now, as always, thank you very much for watching.